Thanks for tuning in to our first Epic Revenue Roundtable. I am your host, Arvind Banga. Epic Revenue Consultants is a hospitality company whose mission is rooted in the idea of driving extraordinary profits through innovation and collaboration. Our monthly talk series brings to life this concept to listeners by activating a collaborative roundtable approach on profitability topics, creating thought-provoking dialogue from a wide variety of industry experts. In today's series, we will be joined by Epic Advisory Board members, Kaushik, Arvind Bala, Ted Schweitzer, and Victoria Winter to talk through why in this cash preservation climate, it's important to understand the cost of your channel distribution. And with that, I want to bring everybody's attention to the reservation cost calculator, which was done with inputs from the entire Epic Advisory Board. And we think it's really important now more than ever to ensure that all hoteliers are understanding their reservation costs across the board. So as you can see on the screen, we have separated out the reservation costs in two tabs, independent and brand. For today's example, because we want to keep time short and we really value your time, we're going to be looking at the independent model and what that perspective looks like, and potentially touch on the brand as well as we navigate through today's questions. So you can see here that we've separated out via the various channels, and obviously fully knowing that the ADR, average daily rate, is not all representative and at each individual channel. However, to make things very easy, we have allocated $100 as the average daily rate for that channel. We've separated out into property direct, web direct, paid, inclusive of loyalty members, web direct organic, large global OTA agency, large global OTA merchant, which is net rate, global distribution system, and voice, or your res center. And as we kind of go through this grid here, you can apply various discounts in terms of both your paid channels, your direct channels, as well as your OTAs. So typically on direct channels, you have loyalty discounts that you want to, or other incentives. You can add typically Booster, VIP, Genius to your global OTA partners as they have those different programs. And then, what you get from there is typically your effective ADR after those discounts are given prior to. Typically thereafter, if you look at the global OTA, you are paying a merchant, which is the OTAs are taking their cut ahead of time. And in this case, we've allocated 20%. So effectively what you have is your effective star ADR in line 14 here. Thereafter, we have allocated various costs. And again, this is typical of many different hotels in terms of what your PMS tech fees are, connectivity fees, loyalty fees, the commission, again, on the retail aspect for OTAs, as well as on your GDS travel agent, paid search fee, and typically credit card fee. And the calculator, which will be shared after the fact, after our recording today, will allow you to adjust this on the fly for everything that's highlighted in blue. And then thereafter, you have your net revenue or revenue capture by reservation. And we'll get into more detail with some of the folks. So with that being said, let me open it up. And I'd really love Ted to answer this first question that we have. How do hoteliers typically view the cost of a reservation?
So
Ted, how you doing?
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks for having me on this morning. So based on the information that you've put together with the calculator, it's a great topic to kind of dive into. Direct retail rates are typically a little higher, while merchant rates are lower, and you see that based in the data that you're showing. And that's really based on the margin being held up front by the OTAs. Clearly, a higher merchant mix can lower the STR rate index, despite what the retail customer is actually paying for that stay. However, direct channel bookings often reflect a lower overall ADR, as a corporate and other discounts are applied based on loyalty programs and more. You have to consider this as part of the broader mix of rate segments and not necessarily underperformance. When evaluating the channel mix for your hotel, it's just as important to understand rate segmentation and utilize actual rate segments for a better comparison, meaning measure retail to retail, corporate to corporate, etc. If you over-index in a single channel or rate segment, it makes the comparison in STR a little more difficult, as you may over or under-index on the aggregated ADR, and it's important to understand those implications when you're running your hotel. In a few minutes, Dev's going to talk about the importance of capturing all demand in these current times and not to get too lost on the channel until demand is stronger across the board. But learning to understand the true impact of ADR from each rate segment and its impact on profitability using simple tools like the one Epic has created is very important. And I'm a strong believer in driving as much direct bookings as possible, but to also capture as much demand as you can, which means effectively leveraging across these channels.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. And I think the audience as well, I mean, obviously, there's a stark variance between, what you're looking at in the effective star ADR. And I think taking everything that you had mentioned into consideration, again, taking a very simplistic approach, but, the audience can come into each of these different perspectives and channels and be able to manipulate what this ADR looks like. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Ted.
Exactly. You bet.
Awesome. Well, that's really interesting, and I really love how you put that into context. There's additional costs that we did talk about when we were going through the grid. And Arvind, I'd love to get your perspective on what is the true cost of customer acquisition as it pertains to the revenue capture, based on what Ted mentioned, and then adding in the various fees that typically, some hoteliers may not, put the two together.
Thank you, Inder. That's a great question and a pretty powerful and deep one. So if we were to look at it very simplistically, there's a B2B channel, a business to business channel, and a business to consumer channel. So each one, as you build out the customer acquisition cost, it has its own framework. But here we'll focus on direct, but the principles are broadly the same. So let's dive in a bit. So customer acquisition cost, in a very simplistic way, is marketing expenses divided by the revenue generated by the customer. So take a very simple example, going with your grid. If $10 are spent on paid search to generate, say, a $200 revenue from a customer, then the customer acquisition cost is $10 in this example, and in a percentage form, it's say 5%. So it's pretty straightforward when you look at it for a singular channel, right? But what makes it somewhat more nuanced and a bit more complex than that is the various layers, and it's really a thought process and a framework that we need to lay it out for our owners and stakeholders. So the first one is, very simplistically looking at it, whether it's a B2B and B2C. B2B is typically less complex, though, because it's just a commission that you're paying out, and it's pretty explicit. So you know that a wholesaler would be charging, say, 20 to 25% of your commission cost, and that comes up as a customer acquisition cost. But the other layer to look at it, especially in the direct space, is what is the repeat purchase? So if a consumer walks through the door the first time around through a wholesaler, and then subsequently the next 5 stays on that year were coming through directly, the lifetime value of the consumer is very different. And therefore, the customer acquisition cost comes down from, say, 20% in the first instance down to 4% or 3%, depending on how frequently the customer stays with you. The other way to look at it is also the time period, because what we are selling as a hotel product is a perishable product. So if the room is not sold today, then it's a lost opportunity. So the time period is really a crucial component. If a guest is coming through a third-party channel, through a wholesaler, for example, during a low demand period, during a particularly hot summer month in a ski resort, that's brilliant. It's additive. So that adds a layer of complexity one needs to think through. It's a market as well. So if a consumer is coming from a far off market, an international market, into your hotel where you have no sales presence in that marketplace, which is purely additive as well. So it's bringing in a net new customer. That's something to think through. So what I'm trying to say is build out a framework, get alignment of this framework from the various stakeholders, because there is no industry definition of customer acquisition cost. So build that out, get an alignment, and then the whole objective is, once you define it, is to double down on the lowest channel customer acquisition cost by period. So that would give some kind of a clarity to answer your question.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's I think the way that you put that is great perspective for all of the audience that's on the phone here. And then real quick, obviously, in this perspective here, so if I understand you correctly, I mean, doubling down, typically on the direct channels, as long as, in the revenue perspective, the cost here on large OTAs and even global distribution systems is a very stark difference. And maybe this is, a good question to get in with Dev as he kind of talks through this. And let me just zoom in on the effective star ADR by revenue capture. So Dev, Arvind, appreciate that. Dev, third party versus direct, how should we be thinking about this in the current landscape that we have? Obviously, Ted has mentioned, how we're looking at the STR effective ADR, and then from, the various perspectives of the costs, as we've looked at and as I described it, what is your perspective on third party versus direct right now?
Hey, thanks, Inder. It's great to be part of this conversation. So coming from a different industry as well, I have some interesting insights to share. And all these things are great, right? And third parties, obviously, I'm a big proponent of direct channels as well, as Ted alluded to, making sure that all the fundamentals of getting bookings direct is critical. But at the end of the day, right, we are in a cash conservation mode. So for me, I think the way I would characterize the third party against direct is no revenue is bad revenue. There is a point at which a revenue from an incremental, we should be able to come up with a framework to say whether a transaction is incremental or not. So for example, for some hotels at 60% occupancy, if I go to the 61st% occupancy, a demand coming through an OTA channel may not be incremental. So what I'm trying to say here is no revenue is bad revenue. There is a point at which you have to figure out what is truly incremental and what is not truly incremental. And until that base business comes into play, we have to figure out, for every hotel, I think we can help you with that as well, with respect to some of the calculations and the frameworks to build out and say, for a hotel X in this market at X% occupancy, you will be truly incremental from an OTA perspective. So that is number one. Number two is, if you look at any revenue management system, right, none of the revenue management systems are going to be segmenting demand based on the net revenue piece that are out there. And hence, by definition, it's very difficult to allocate demand based on these different channels. They always assume that the STR ADR that Inder alluded to, that's the way they kind of track demand as well on their end. So it's very difficult to kind of segment automatically in a revenue management system framework as well. So this requires a nuanced way of thinking. And as I alluded to, as even Arvind alluded to, right, with respect to a nuanced way of putting together frameworks on what truly incremental is something that we have to do some math around and basically say at 60% occupancy, if I go to 60 to 65, then OTAs are not incremental. And we have to think along those lines rather than worrying about this right now, especially in a cash conservation world where we have to start thinking of building out the base business. And I go from the perspective of, I come from the perspective of no revenue is bad revenue. All revenue is good revenue. There's a point at which you have to manage. That incrementality management point is depending on the hotel that you are in, it varies at what occupancy levels it's truly incremental. So that is something that Epic can help you with it as well.
Awesome. No, that's great. And I totally agree with you. No, in this environment, no revenue is bad revenue, as you put it so eloquently. Victoria, so fully knowing, and I think all the speakers appreciate everything that's been said so far, and hopefully, I know that the audience is enjoying this. I think we've all kind of mentioned that no revenue is bad revenue, but in the environment, you still want to maximize direct bookings. How can hotels continue to do that, and what can they focus on?
I think, marketing for direct bookings, there is such value in it for hotels. And there are really, for me, two lines of thought that independent hotels specifically should be looking at when they're trying to drive direct bookings. The first is make sure whatever you're marketing in terms of a rate, it's on parity with what you're selling with the OTAs. In this, environment and cash preservation, not just for hotels themselves, but for people as well. And so if you're offering a lower rate on an OTA versus your property direct, you're almost encouraging, that consumer to not book with you. I think the second thing that I want to kind of call to action is right now, we know that people really crave authentic and local experiential travel, and where hotels have an advantage versus, say, the larger OTAs as being in market and being able to establish relationships with, variety of sightseeing organizations or things that make your destination unique, and building a package from that creates a true, differentiator from the larger OTAs and gives a person a reason to book with your brand. And in that same thought process, what you may want to look to do is offer some type of added value component. We were talking to a hotel group that is based out of Bali, and one of the things that she was discussing with us was if we thought it was worth her while to add in, a travel arrangement through direct bookings to encourage that shift. And I will always say yes, 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 just because you want to give reasons to book with you. One other thing I think I want to discuss, and Inder, if you can kind of just zoom in a little bit, the cost of a direct booking is so much higher than an OTA if you're looking at this cost calculator. So where you get $90 for a direct booking versus maybe saying $70 or $72 for an OTA, if you can apply a percentage of that booking to meta search, I think hotels would really gain a lot from doing that. Independents don't do it as much as the big brands, but there really is a true value component for taking a percentage, maybe it's 10%, and applying that over to meta search campaign, because not only will you help to increase your share and divert people from booking from OTAs, but once you get that consumer to book with you directly, you've now expanded your audience. And so now you can market to them in the future. And those are really the three things that I recommend hotels to do when they're looking to drive direct bookings.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, no, I think it's so important. And I think Arvind touched on it as well as, in the wholesale example, if you get somebody to come in through that channel, but move them over, it's a completely different lifetime customer value. But so many hotels sometimes don't invest in the meta search because either there's an upfront cost, associated with that, but you can tell even at a 10% cost, dividing out whatever the CPC cost per click is, or from an acquisition, if you can put that into a reservation perspective, you're getting almost $8 more on that cost. Sorry, on that reservation. That's awesome. All right, cool. I really appreciate everybody's time so far. Rapid fire. Now that we know all the overall costs, what is the differentiator, and how do owners, management companies, and revenue managers look at the cost stack and care about the cost stack? So, Deb, let's start with you. Management company, from a management company's perspective, why do they care about the costs?
Yeah, so coming from a different industry, right, I will give you this perspective. So especially if you own shares in a company, right, the way you will always look at how the company is being managed is what is called as net income. So you will look at net income, and out of the net income comes dividend for you as a shareholder. So any manager, for that matter, right? So that's the reason why shareholders hire managers, and hopefully they are the good managers that can drive the net income line on their balance sheet so that they can give dividend to the owners and the shareholders, right? So that's the expectation that I have for the management companies as well. And For me, I think the way management company, I'm sure they are thinking along those lines, but from a cost perspective, start focusing on EBITDA. EBITDA is the primary vehicle through which you would be measured. And that's the way you would be able to deliver dividends to the shareholders, in this case, the owners, to kind of get the investment on the property that they're looking for. So that be the case, the cost management is critical, revenue management is critical, everything comes together and you are able to deliver the EBITDA growth that they're looking for. And for some reason or other, right, because of the way we are structured, right, there's a brand company that is incentivized for generating revenue. And then the owners looking at net income, and then the management company coming in the middle. It's always not easy to think along those lines. But if every partner in the ecosystem, along with even the OTAs, think in terms of EBITDA, I think as an industry, we will be able to kind of drive the change with respect to cost management that we are looking for, and look at revenue holistically and maximize the EBITDA growth as well. So that's the way I would look at it from a management company perspective. Again, I put the shareholder hat on and try to hire managers. That's the way I would look at it if I were an owner as well. So that's my 2 cents in there.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And Arvind, from an owner's perspective, what does that look like for you, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think rapid fire, 2 words or maybe 3, it's working marketing dollars. So owners, management, you wear a hat, whichever ones, right? The most important item we spoke about was customer acquisition costs, and then doubling down on the lowest channel at that time period. Mm-hmm. So what the owners and stakeholders are trying to do is maximize marketing and ROI. And what I mean by that is, if an owner is allocated $1,000 for marketing, if 400 of those $1,000 are going towards management, whether it's various fees, agency fees, and what have you, and only 600 is being invested in marketing, that is inefficient, right? The owner's expectation is, if you're providing $1,000, $990 goes towards, in an ideal world, will go towards marketing, which is always not the case. So there is certainly some inefficiencies, some management, operational expenses. So that's part one. A lot of owners, everybody, not just owners, wants to increase their marketing dollars to be allocated towards consumer generating activities. So that's point one. Second, many owners sometimes look at merchant rates coming through OTAs versus retail rates, and they wear a very different lens. They have a tactical view, and they think about this quarter and next and this year, and they say, hey, by bringing a booking through a merchant, I'm reducing my various management fees and brand fees and what have you, and I can invest more create more working dollars. So that's one way to look at it. So again, to my earlier point, it's important to get an alignment. And once you have that alignment, as a marketer, as a management company, as an owner, have a rock solid strategy of improving your marketing efficiency and marketing dollars.
Awesome. No, that's a great way to look at it from the owner's lens. And last but not least, Ted, from general manager or revenue manager perspective, what do they care about the cost stack?
Yeah, it's those are all great topics that we've covered so far with this with rapid fire. So I'm glad to hear those different lenses. It's important to drive top line revenue, but it's also critical to Dev's point around profitability or EBITDA, right? With that said, you've also got to remember that the general manager or revenue manager typically don't manage the contracts or transaction costs that are set either by the brand or by owner level agreements. So when you're taking a look at how you want to incentivize those particular positions, a blended mix for incentive targets of top line and profitability, along with other critical KPIs, right, for what their areas are. If general manager thinking customer satisfaction, right, customer repeat, those types of kind of critical pieces. Blending all of that together in the right kind of fashion where they do have control to actually manage the outcome effectively, it's going to help drive increases in both of those top line and profitability lines.
That's great. No, I love that. And I think probably a good segment for our next session with the Epic Advisory. How do we evolve from typical RevPAR into potentially a GoPAR type environment? But definitely great topic for another time. So I really appreciated all of your valuable insights. I hope the audience was able to look at the calculator. We will make that available to everybody there. After this is publicized. If you're interested in figuring out how you can further understand channel incrementality, and how that can benefit your property, or just how reservations and what the costs are and what your actual revenue capture looks like, you can definitely get in touch with any one of us. And if you want to connect to learn more about what our advisory board can do for you, visit epic-rev.com. Again, that's www.epic-rev.com. This has been Arvind Banga with Epic Revenue Consultants and the Epic Advisory Board. Thank you all for your time today and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.